The Mackie DLZ line of Creator mixers are incredibly powerful machines that are packed with a ton of features and a lot of creative potential. But as it turns out, if you're thinking about buying this mixer, there's a couple of very important things you should take into consideration first. Let's check it out. Hey guys, it's Steve from Fiddlerlight Studio, and today we're checking out the Mackie DLZ Creator line of mixers. Now these guys are incredibly powerful and feature-laden mixers with a ton of creative possibility. However, if you plan on doing anything more than just a simple broadcast or podcast directly to the micro SD card or the onboard USB stick in the back, there are some potentially show-stopping issues that you need to take into consideration before buying this mixer. Let's dive in and find out a bit more. The DLZ line of mixers are truly podcasting powerhouses. They got 4 Onyx 80 high gain preamps, a 10-inch touchscreen to get control over it all, auto mix functionality on all 4 mic preamps. You've got mix agent software to help you get up and running quickly with your levels, Bluetooth connectivity for mix minus call-ins. It supplies up to 4 custom headphone mixes. You've got USB connections and a multi-track USB audio interface, as well as a micro SD card for recording all your multi-track mixes. So it's time to look at the 3 major workflow issues that might keep you from buying this powerhouse mixer. The first issue that you're likely to encounter that might seriously affect your workflow compared to other podcasting mixers is Mackie's multi-track compressed audio format. If your podcast involves more than just you speaking by yourself and you have several guests as well as mix minus phone calls and background music with sound effects, you're likely to want to separate those tracks later for editing. So it's important to understand that the DLZ Creator line of mixers records to its SD card or its USB key in a protocol known as polywave format. This type of file format bundles all of your recorded multi-track files into one large single stereo wave with metadata information on how to decode it later. This file format is used in many professional applications, and it requires a 2-track editor or a video editor to separate them in post. So obviously, if you're looking for the ultimate in ease of convenience and you don't have access to external audio editors or more advanced video editors, this may or may not be something that seriously affects your current studio workflow. The next issue that might be of serious concern to you if you use the Mackie DLZ line of Creator mixers as your primary audio interface is its fixed sample bitrate. The Mackie DLZ line of mixers have pristine audio preamps. The Onyx 80 preamps are incredibly high gain and very, very clean. This means that if you're going to be using this as your primary audio interface, it will make fantastic sounding recordings. And with all of its other audio flexibility and its routing options, this is a real contender for a primary audio interface, especially with its multi-track options. However, there is some concern in that this mixer's sample bitrate is fixed at 48K. Now, that's fine for video work, but you might want to be able to jump back and forth with audio-related projects to 44.1 and then back to 48K. The fact that this is fixed at 48K means you can't adjust to other projects' sample bitrate requirements. This could be a serious workflow concern for you if you're doing things like YouTube tutorials. Since a lot of YouTube is actually in 44.1K, the mixer has to have the ability to jump back and forth between different sample bit rates to accommodate those different streams. Curiously enough, Mackie's own analog counterpoint, which is considerably cheaper than the DLZ line of mixers, can switch its sample rate effortlessly and record all the way up to 192K if you need that kind of resolution. The fact that the Mackie DLZ line of Creator mixers sample bitrate is fixed at 48K may or may not be a serious workflow issue to you, depending on how you work in your studio. And the third and potentially largest of all the issues that may be a showstopper for a lot of you out there using this combination of equipment is if you're doing video podcasting and you're using the DLZ for the audio portion of it. The reason why is because you're probably using some kind of screencasting software. You're using OBS or Camtasia or some version. We're on a Mac, and so we're using Apple's Quicktime recording software, which is incredibly easy and incredibly convenient. You can switch back and forth between screens, open screens, effortlessly. If you're using OBS, for example, OBS allows you to do the same thing, but you have to choose each one of the screens that you're using, in this case, a digital audio workstation, and that has to be displayed as a window. And then those windows are tiled and everything put in a particular order, and then you switch between those. If you're using Apple QuickTime, you don't have to choose any of those window displays and set them up ahead of time. Apple QuickTime simply records whatever happens on your screen, including all your cursor movements and everything. You don't have to select separate windows or tile them up into some kind of presentation like OBS. And for this reason, Apple QuickTime is a very popular screencasting and recording software, especially to do video podcasting with. Unfortunately, this is where the actual problems start. As it turns out, the DLZ line of Creator mixers from Mackie, even though there's a provision in the Routings tab to collapse its multi-track audio output down to just 2 channels, applications like Apple's QuickTime and certain other pieces of streaming software can still detect those multi-track audio outputs and will collapse the output of it into mono anyway. And like we mentioned before, Apple's Pro Effects version 3 line of mixers can actually record into Apple's QuickTime and any other piece of streaming software in stereo with no problems whatsoever. So to test this problem in the real world, we're going to put both of these mixers side by side, do the exact same tests on each one, and check the results. The test is simple. We'll use a simulated podcast environment in our music program to record 4 vocalists in extreme stereo field positions, which will make it easier to detect on playback. We'll play back our project while screen recording directly into Apple QuickTime on each mixer, and then check the result. The setup will be the same for both mixers as they both support dual USB streams back to each mixer. We'll test each mixer's return USB stream 1 and 2, as well as return streams 3 and 4, and check the result. We'll start with streams 3 and 4 as this combines stereo PC playback with the audio that's coming into the mixer. Then we'll double check and confirm that our USB output is in fact channels 3 and 4 on our Pro Effects mixer. Now it's time to play back our stereo podcast and screen record the entire thing into Apple QuickTime. This is our first podcast example. It's voice number 1, and it's on the left-hand side of the stereo. This is our second podcast voice example, and it's on the right-hand side of the stereo. This is our third podcast voice example, and it is on the partial left-hand side of the stereo. This is our fourth and final podcast voice example, and it is on the partial right-hand side of the stereo field. The finished result is recorded as a QuickTime movie and placed on our desktop. Let's play back our file that was saved to the desktop on our Pro FX version 3 and see if we have a stereo recording. This is our first podcast example. It's voice number 1, and it's on the left-hand side of the stereo. This is our second podcast voice example, and it's... All right, so we have confirmation that that file got recorded in stereo into QuickTime. Now it's time to duplicate the same test on our Mackie DLZ Creator. In this next example, we've switched everything over to the Mackie DLZ Creator. We've got a mic on channel 1, check, 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 1, 2, check, 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 1, 2. And we have our test podcast coming back on channels 7 and 8 in the mixer. And as we can see in the LED readouts as we play our first example, this is our first podcast example. We can confirm the signal being returned on channels 7 and 8 in stereo because this is hard left. So our LCD is reflecting that on the meters here. Let's play back our project and check the stereo result. This is our first podcast example. It's voice number 1, and it's on the left-hand side of the stereo. This is our second podcast voice example, and it's on the right-hand side of the stereo. This is our third podcast voice example, and it is on the partial left-hand side of the stereo. This is our fourth and final podcast voice example, and it is on the partial right-hand side of the stereo field. Now it's time to check our Mackie DLZ file that was saved to the desktop and see if we did, in fact, get a stereo recording into QuickTime. This is our first podcast example. It's voice number 1, and it's on the left-hand side of the stereo. This is our second podcast voice example, and it's on the right-hand side of the stereo. And we can clearly hear that it is, in fact, not in stereo. This part up here is not playing on the hard left, and this is not playing on the right. These are recorded and collapsed into mono, even though we had engaged that stereo button and took it out of multi-track mode, which is supposed to solve that problem, but clearly it has not. The DLZ mixers still record in mono to Apple's QuickTime. If you're using Apple's QuickTime software to record or capture your screen, and you want that capture to be in stereo, Apple has to understand the audio coming from your audio capture device. In this case, the Mackie DLZ Creator line of mixers. Both the XS and the DLZ Creator operate exactly the same in this regard. So the reason that we're using Apple's Quicktime here is because it's kind of the canary in the coal mine. There are a lot of other pieces of software out there for video podcasting that have that same multi-track limitation, where if they see additional streams of audio coming in, they'll simply collapse the screen recorded audio to mono. If you're using OBS, you catch a break here, as it's one of the screen recording applications that can correctly interpret the DLZ Creator's combined USB Stream 1 and 2 option on the routing page. So in the end, some of these issues may affect your studio workflow, and they may not, but for those of us that are affected by this, it's a pretty significant studio workflow consideration. And after several lengthy calls to Mackie, they helped us confirm all these issues and promised to send them up the chain of command in hopes of a future firmware update. Now, every single time we've dealt with Mackie, they have been fantastic in their tech support. It's a real resource, and they're capable and helpful and very knowledgeable. And in addition, we have and use a lot of Mackie products here in the studio. They have always been very dependable, and they are an incredible value for the money, in addition to sounding fantastic and being built like a tank. And in the real pro audio world, that's worth a lot. So Mackie is pretty high in our regard in terms of studio equipment, and we really hope that there are some firmware updates in the future for this, because the Mackie DLZ line of Creator mixers are incredible podcasting powerhouses, and they're very popular, not just in podcasting, but as an audio interface, screen recording, audio tutorials, YouTube tutorials. So there's a huge user base out there, and we're excited to see that grow and get more capable as these mixers mature. Hey, thanks for hanging out, guys. If you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. It really does help keep a channel like this going, and it helps me make more videos like this. Stay safe, be creative. Add something creative to the world. They could really use it. Take care. We'll catch you guys in the next video.